Well, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started.
Oh, good. Oh, yes, finally, it's 7:15. Anyway.
All right, so I do want to start off by officially saying this is my way of doing things. It does not mean it is the right way of doing things or the only way of doing things. This is really just to help get other people, get eyes on a process that can seem intimidating when you first approach it. Essentially what I do is I just break down the essentials of what makes a battle game into its simplest components, stuff that is easy for the designer to process, and then build our way up from there. So there are going to be rules that I have that I follow that I will be going over when I'm designing battle games, but every rule has an exception, so don't feel like this is a static thing that cannot be modified to fit your specific situation or the things that you do with your park. This is just kind of a foundation to lay for anybody that is new to the concept of designing battle games and just wants to jump off with a little bit more than, good luck, try it out. So I'm going to start off with just a little note that I wrote beforehand, just kind of going over the importance that battle games have for our culture. Battle games are a critical part of AmpGuard, whether you're at a giant event with hundreds of people or whether you're just at your regular park day with your friends that you meet with every week. They play such a huge role in player engagement and retention that you could argue that they are the heartbeat of our community. When you have good battle games, you have engagement, you have camaraderie, you have a positive environment, which leads to growth and retention. And when you have poorly run battle games that don't feel fair, battle games that aren't fun, it leads to boredom, it leads to stagnation, people lose interest, and then you have community fallout, and you have the opposite of that retention that you would get with having good battle games. So one of the questions that I want to answer throughout the course of these classes is how do we avoid stagnation at our local parks? So I've been through scenarios. I've been playing this game for about 8 years now, and I've talked to people in parks that are like, well, I really like the community and everything, but we just run the same 2 or 3 battle games every week, and I'm starting to get bored. I wish we could get a little bit more variety in our battle games. So I'm hoping that we can actually answer the question of how do we get that variety and how do we avoid that stagnation when it comes to the games that we play at our parks. And it's actually a lot simpler than you might think. And the thing that I want to start off with is game balance when it comes to avoiding stagnation. So there are essentially 2 different types of objectives or scoring types, essentially, that we utilize in this game. And those are progressive scoring objectives and win condition scoring objectives. And I want to break down what each of those is and the pros and cons of using them. So I'm going to start off with win conditions. Examples of that would be something like mutual annihilation, kill the enemy captain, capture the flag, stuff like that, where you do a specific action and that wins you the game. In the example of that Red and Bear actually gave, for those of you that were here before we started the class, just for the general discussion, with his hammer game, that is a win condition game where the person holding the hammer at the end of the game wins. The pros of these types of objectives is you have less note taking because it's really easy. It's really simple to know who won the game. The person that captured the flag won the game. The person that killed the enemy captain, they won the game. The person holding the siege hammer, they won the game. So there's less tracking involved than with your progressive scoring types. which means you need fewer reeves to do them. These do tend to lead towards shorter game times. So if you're, just looking for something that you don't want to spend a whole lot of time doing, like you're all tired at the end of the day, the games are typically shorter. They're easier to run with a smaller amount of people, and you can make them really thematic. Like one of the examples I gave, kill the enemy captain, that can be a really thematic game type, especially if you have some kind of a storyline running with your park. We had a rain theme that we held as a park 5 or 6 years ago. It's been quite a long time. But we had a basically Dark Lord versus a Phoenix storyline going on that culminated with a final battle that was a kill the captain style game. And, the team that could kill the Dark Lord or the team that could kill the Phoenix first was the winner. So that was a really thematic game type, and it's really easy to get those with win condition style objectives. Now, the cons to this style of objective, they are very easy to break. If you can find a loophole in the system or a loophole in the rules or a loophole in the game design, they are really easy to take advantage of, and that short game time that I was talking about can be laughably short. Like a game that was intended to last for 15 to 20 minutes could very easily be over in under a minute. I've personally seen that happen. So with that, they are a little hard to balance because you have to be a lot more careful when you're writing your rules to make sure that there are no loopholes for people to take advantage of, and stuff like that. But those are examples of win condition objectives. The other objective type I want to talk about is progressive scoring. So examples of progressive scoring, real quick, how many of you guys have attended or have heard about the games that were ran at Kylus back in October of last year? Anybody?
There for that, I think.
I was there for one of them.
Okay, so essentially, progressive scoring types are objectives that are tracked on a continual timer at certain increments. For example, one of the games that I ran at Kylus back in October, we had 5 separate flagpoles, and we had 2 different colors of flags, one for each team that was playing. And the game, I believe, lasted for 20 minutes, and at 1 minute increments, the Reeves would count up the number of colors or the number of flags that each team held, and then they were all added together at the end of the game to get a final score. So, at most, a team could score 5 points every minute, and then if one team held all 5 points for 20 minutes, that would have led to 100 points. So that's an example of a progressive scoring system. The pros of progressive scoring is they are much easier to balance because it's really easy as a Reeve to look out and be like, oh, there's 2 orange flags and 3 pink flags, and be like, okay, so I need to track 2 points and 3 points. And then 7 minutes into the game, theoretically, if you've got your teams balanced well, it's going to be somewhere in the range of 14 to 17 points, somewhere in there. And it's easier to balance those types of games as far as score mechanics. They also allow for comebacks. So with a win condition style game, you do the win condition and the game is over. In a progressive scoring system, it doesn't matter how badly you get pushed back in the first half of the game, you always have an opportunity to come back and win that game. Another pro for this style of objective is you have continuous player engagement. So there are examples of win condition games where Red and Bear, I'm going to call you out real quick. With the Siege Hammer game that you were talking about, you were talking about how some of the newer players went after it really hard in the very beginning. Some of your veteran players, kind of held back and conserved their energy, and then went at it really hard in the last couple minutes of the game. With progressive scoring types, your players have a reason to continue playing at their best for the entirety of the game, rather than just holding back and waiting and then having one big push. So that leads to a continuous player engagement. And they also allow you to always play to full game duration. So one of my issues with win condition objectives, like I stated earlier, they can be really easy to break, and a game that was intended to last for 20 minutes can be over in 2 to 3, and that leaves everybody kind of feeling a little bit off about it, and a lot of the time it leaves people salty because they feel like they didn't have a fair chance. They feel like the other team, took advantage of a loophole, which, oftentimes does happen. But with progressive scoring types, you always get to play the full duration of the game, so everybody has an equal opportunity to score points and win the game. Cons of progressive scoring is they have required tracking of points. You have to have a Reeve that is tracking points the entire duration of the game. In the example I gave with the flag posts, you need someone to count up like each flag post at every 1 minute increment. So every 60 seconds, your Reeve has to track how many points are being scored in order for the game to be fair. So that will occasionally lead to needing more Reeves on the field, which, some small parks definitely have issues with, especially, when you only have 4 or 5 people on the field and they all want to play. So that is a definite con of progressive scoring. So now that we've broken down those two different types of objectives, I want to talk about the actual in-game mechanics for scoring. So while there are exceptions, most of the scoring objectives that we use in AmpGuard can be broken down into 3 categories, and those 3 categories are kill, capture, and control. And I'm going to look at some examples of each one of those, just to give you a kind of a taste of what I mean, that all of our games can be broken into these 3 categories. Again, there are exceptions to every rule, but these are the 3 categories that have really, when you break it down to the simplest mechanics, this is what 99% of our game objectives boil down to. So the kill objective, it sounds generic, but it has a surprising amount of utility if you can think outside of the box. Kill objectives are good for warm-ups or for use as some tiebreaker. That's a weird note that I scribbled. I don't understand that. Anyway, examples of kill type objectives are a mutual annihilation game type, kill the captain game type, or even if you think a little bit more outside the box, something like a zombie survival, where you have players in the center of the map and you have zombies surrounding them trying to, kill as many players to become zombies, last man standing wins. Those are all examples of a kill objective type. The object of the game, the only thing that you have to worry about is killing your opponent or transverse surviving to the end of the game. Then we have capture. Capture game types are games that have you gathering items for a specific purpose or at a specific point. The capture game objective makes for really mobile games. It keeps the action moving. It's good for your mobility classes, people that like to run around a lot. And they are usually spread across the field quite a bit. Examples of a capture game would be Capture the Flag, Gather the Eggs, which is something that we play at our local park, where we have these little Easter eggs that are filled with rubber mulch and then wrapped in duct tape to look like little iron ingots, and we'll scatter 30 or 40 of them on the field, and then the objective of the game is to gather as many eggs as you can into your basket. That's an example of a capture game. There is another game that I ran at Curse. I called it Mana Burn, and that one had 5 points in the center of the battlefield that had mana of the 5 different colors associated in Magic the Gathering. And the objective of the game was to get the mana and take it back to your base to then use the different colors to summon monsters to your side of the field. That is another example of a capture game type. Again, it is gathering items for a specific purpose or a specific point. The third one is control. So control game types are all about dominating specific points of the battlefield while preventing your opponents from doing the same. Control objective types center the action, allows for more static play styles to feel effective, and it keeps all of the action pretty much contained in one place. If you have an archer that doesn't really like to move, or somebody that may have an injury or something that isn't as mobile as some other players, putting objectives like this into a game allow those players to feel a little bit more like they can contribute. Because in a control style game, let's take King of the Hill. King of the Hill for an example. You can have an archer that doesn't really want to get involved in close combat that can, post up at whatever point, let's say 45 distance from the hill, and they can just fire away at the hill, and pretty much everybody's going to leave them alone because they're not worried about the archer, they're worried about the hill. So again, it centers the action and allows for more static players to feel like they're contributing, whereas in a capture the flag game, that same archer who can't move very well or who may be injured or who just doesn't want to participate in close combat, in capture the flag, they're going to be having to constantly run around in order to feel like they're efficient and they're contributing to their team. All 3 of these different objectives are really important to incorporate for the different styles of player, for the people that have different ways that they want to play the game. These 3 objectives all cater to a different crowd, which, going back to our point of stagnation, the more you cater to the diversity of your crowd, the more engagement you're going to have overall. So, getting back to the concept of avoiding stagnation, my process for designing a battle game is actually incredibly simple. So I will choose one of these objective types, either kill, capture, or control, and make a game. So for an example, I'm going to use the kill objective. So I show up to Park, and it's the first battle game of the day. I'm like, oh man, I didn't plan anything. What am I going to do? Well, let's run a kill game. So I'm like, okay, well, let's play Mutual Annihilation. Get the aggressive people that want to just get up in your face. Let them have a game. It's really simple to run. I don't have to think about it a whole lot. And it's really good for a warm-up. Because in a Mutual Annihilation style game, there's not a whole lot of tactics that go into the battlefield itself. You're just going out there and hitting people. So I'm like, okay, first game we're going to play Mutual Annihilation. Everybody's like, okay, cool. And then the next game, game 2 of the day, all we do is just choose a different objective from those 3 and run a game of that style. So our first game was a kill game. So our second game, let's do a capture game. So I set up capture the flag. Again, this goes back to making sure all of your different players have something that they feel like they can contribute to. And the capture game is going to allow your more mobile players to get out there. They can run around, they can jog across the field, and they can, assassins especially, you can use your blink abilities, you can use your teleport abilities, and all of those movement things, keeping the battlefield dynamic and everything. It's going to really appeal to that style of player. So capture the flag's done. We move on to our third game. well, we only have one other objective type that we haven't done, so let's do a control game. So let's play node capture. You set up 3 nodes, and then personally, I would do a progressive scoring system where you score each node in certain increments. You can do those as win conditions and just have whoever is in the node when the game ends is considered the winner, or whoever's in the node gets a point or whatever. But again, going back to the appealing to the diversity of your players, having that control game is going to allow people with less mobility to feel like they have an active and impactful presence on the battlefield. So, we've ran 3 games. We've ran a kill game, we've ran a capture game, and we've ran a control game. So that park day, everybody's got a little bit of a taste of something that they feel like they wanted to do. So, that's a pretty good day, right? So what we're going to do from that point on is your next park day, you're just going to rinse and repeat that same process. You're going to run a kill, you're going to run a capture, you're going to run a control. And from a designer standpoint, let's say week A, I'm running kill, capture, control. Week B, I'm running capture, control, kill. Week C, I'm running control, kill, capture. Something like that. But I'm only utilizing these 3 objectives, so it makes it very easy for me because I know that this is the type of objective that I have to plan, and I've got my concept down, and it's really simple. From a designer standpoint, that's what you're going to look at, and you're going to break it down into its simplest terms, and then just roll from there. But from a player point of view, that first week, you played Mutual Annihilation, you played Capture the Flag, you played Node Control, and then the second week, you played Egg Hunt, you played King of the Hill, you played Kill the Captain, and then the third week, you played Push the Cart, you played Zombie Horde, you played Monster Summoning. So in this 3-week span that we've ran these 9 games, your players have not played the same game more than once, even though you as a game designer are essentially reutilizing the same objectives. You're just packaging it in a different perspective, and it makes it really, really easy to make your games feel dynamic and your players to feel like that there's something there for them engaging, and there's new stuff, and they don't have to get into the same routine of playing the same 3 games every week, even though in all actuality you're playing the same 3 games every week, and you're just wrapping it in a different package that is more appealing. Makes it really, really easy from a game design perspective while also keeping your player base engaged. Does anybody have any questions about any of this? Any discussion points that you would like to bring up?
I got a question. How often do you combine those types of games? Like I've done a couple of battle games where we kind of mixed it up. Like like the same battle game, but part 1 was kind of like capture a resource gathering game, and then the second part was more kill the captain kind of game. How often do you do something like that, and is that something that you would normally recommend?
So I would absolutely recommend doing stuff like that. The only thing that you're going to do is increase the dynamicness of the game. But I would caution more people makes that easier. If you have too many objectives at let's say 6 people show up to a park day. If you have 2 to 3 different objectives, it kind of scatters the battlefield out a little too much. Whereas just having that one singular objective keeps all 6 players focused, on being there, having that camaraderie, and battle gaming amongst themselves. But as you get more and more people, combining these objectives is the best way to make engaging dynamic games. This is actually the same process that I use when I'm designing games for inter-kingdom events. I use this same exact process. The only difference is, instead of being like, this is a kill game, this is a capture game, this is a control game, I say, this is a capture control game with a kill variation as a tiebreaker. So I will utilize, let's say there's the flag capture mechanic, like I talked about earlier, with the 5 different flags, and each team has to hold their flag on there. We will run that as an objective, and then we will also run that would be an example of a control objective, not a capture the flag, I'm sorry. But if we run that, and then at the same time, we also run a egg capture mechanic where there's, certain little objects scattered around the battlefield that each team is trying to collect. You can do both of those and have both the static defensive posturing of the node control style game and the mobility aspect of the capture style game. So as your audience gets bigger, it is a lot easier to incorporate those ideas. And then, let's say at the end of that game, one team wins the node control and one team wins the egg capture. Then you would determine the winner using the tiebreaker of kill points. Again, this is one of those things where progressive scoring does require more reeves to be involved, because in this example, you would want a reeve at both bases for sure. So you could track kill points as people come and respawn, and then you would also want a reeve in the middle to be to be counting the nodes, in your 1 minute increments or 2 minute increments, or however you decide to do that.
I got something. First off, I'm stealing your Iron Eggs idea. That's brilliant.
Oh, it's fantastic, and it's so cheap to do, because especially like if you buy them after Easter eggs are like $2 for 500. Like they're stupidly cheap. Rubber mulch is also incredibly cheap. Like a 50-pound bag of it is maybe $10 the last time I checked, and just putting 1 pound into, or even less, just enough so that they have heft and they're not going to get blown around by the wind, and then the duct tape that you have invested, like they make a really nice small game objective, and you're not spending a whole lot of money. And we've had the ones that I made for years at this point, and we've utilized them a lot. So yes, absolutely steal that.
My secondary thing was, are you going to discuss later on the utilization of props and how that changes the dynamic of the battlefield?
Yeah, I do have that planned. Not for today, though. That's going to be at a different course in the future. This one was basically just the breaking down of objectives and showing my process, just to kind of give people a glimpse into, like, so I've ran games for some pretty large events, and getting ready to run games for an inter-kingdom level event coming up in May. Game design is one of my absolute favorite things to do. I love designing games, and historically, the games that I've designed have gone over really well with the populace. And from a player perspective, my games can look really complex, but this is literally all I'm doing. I'm just breaking it down into kill, capture, control, and then I'm thinking outside of the box on how to spin those objectives to my players to make it feel like it's, to give it variation. So I just really wanted to break down my process and show people that designing games is not nearly as complicated and doesn't have to be intimidating when you break it down into simple steps like this. Yeah, I think either module 2 or 3 I'll be going over terrain and everything and how it affects the battlefield. But just as a little teaser glimpse, terrain is one of the biggest features of a good battle game, in my opinion. I love utilizing terrain, and when you break the game design down into simple perspective like we did today, that gives you a lot more maneuverability to mess with terrain and make your battlefield really, really dynamic without overcomplicating the game and confusing your players.
Yeah, the reason I asked is one of the simplest things I've ever done to affect the game, affect a mutual annihilation game, is put a wall in the middle and see how they operate around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned tactical application, maybe 15 minutes ago. Battlefield tactics really hinge on the ability to use the field to your advantage, and if you don't have any terrain, it kind of takes away from the ability to tactically plan stuff. So the more terrain you have to work with, the more interesting your battles can become from a tactical standpoint. And I'm a huge fan of terrain. I love terrain, and like I said, I'm gonna get pretty deep into terrain in a later module, but today's just the basics. So
Okay, that's the end of my query.
does anybody have any further questions? Anyone at all? Does anybody feel?
Thank you.
Does anybody feel like there is a aspect of this that they don't fully understand or that could use a little bit more diving into?
What are your thoughts about utilizing a game to gain an advantage on a different game? Say for example, I run Hammer of God that I was telling you earlier, and giving that the person who won that an advantage into the next game by still being able to utilize the hammer at a depleted capacity.
I think that's perfectly fine as long as you're not completely upsetting the balance of your field. I think that can, again, going back to the thematic element that we talked about at the beginning of the class, elements like that can really add a dynamic element to your theme, especially if you're doing a storyline based reign and like your games kind of play off of one another. Like, I think that's a really good deal as long as you can keep it relevant and as long as you can keep it at least semi-balanced. And balancing is one of those things. You don't necessarily have to always balance the number of players. So in an example with the hammer, if you have 10 people on the field and this person won the first game, so they have access to the hammer in the second game, maybe do 6-on-4 rather than 5-on-5, just as a little bit of a balancing factor. And that's something that you're really just going to have to feel out, because every field is different. Like, I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly how to run your field at your local park, down to the minutia, because everybody's different and everybody's going to have their own way of doing things, their things that they enjoy. But as a general rule, like, I am for the concept of it. Just don't let it get out of hand.
Yeah, how I ended up balancing that was the hammer was depleted, so now it just had armor crushing and shield crushing, armor breaking.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that relics, as a general rule, are underutilized in our game. Like, we have so many different magic items in the rules that we never see on the field. I would love to see a renaissance, if you will, of magic items in our game, which is actually something that I'm working on for Gnome World War. We're trying to get some interkingdom relics out there for the populace to start using again, and hopefully bring a little bit more of the roleplay element back into the game. Because that's
Bring back the
something
dagger of infinite penetration.
I don't know if we're going to go that far, but we do have some pretty exciting things in store for Gnome World War. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like as long as your players are having fun and having an inherently unbalanced game every once in a while isn't even necessarily a bad thing. Like, if you wanted to give one of your players a siege hammer and then make a game designed around, you got to kill the guy with the siege hammer, like that can be fun every once in a while. Gives that player an opportunity to feel like an absolute powerhouse on the battlefield, and gives everybody a little bit of a hurrah, we did it, type moment. But it's not something that you want to run every day, because when you run imbalanced battle games, they can stagnate really quickly, especially if one side is losing a lot more than the other side. So again, it's just something you kind of got to play with and get a feel with for your personal area and your group.
Yeah, we are playing with balancing in my park because we run a thing every week called a monster hunt, and we basically pick a monster out of the door and take either it's me or me and a couple other people end up being the monster, and it becomes a small quest for everybody else to come kill the monster. Because we have a bunch of young kids as our main body of our populace.
That's fair. I remember those days really well. We went through a very similar era back when we first moved our park to the city that we're located in now. There was on average 4 or 5 adults and 12 kids.
So actually, speaking on diversity, because actually I have a question since we kind of brought up the subject of monsters. One thing I was kind of wondering, because my park is pretty diverse. There's a lot of new people, there's a lot of people that's been here for a while, but kind of unlock the game, and you have a lot of veterans, so there's a lot of diversity in there. They all kind of look for different things. What would you advise on when it comes to adding more monsters in there? Because I mean, I tried to do a little splash on it, and when I do a little splash, it turns out kind of well, but finding the balance of too many monsters versus just little monsters is something I was just kind of wondering how would you balance that?
It really all depends on the game type and what you're trying to accomplish. The biggest thing with monsters is just knowing, like, your players have to understand how the monster works. That's the biggest thing that I've seen players run into, is they'll throw a monster on the field that they don't quite fully explain, or their players don't quite fully comprehend what they're capable of doing. And in those specific situations, the monster can feel really unfair. So just as long as your people have a breakdown of what the monster is capable of, and everybody is on the same page as far as what the monster can do, I think that adding monsters is a great way to increase battle game diversity, especially with your veteran players, because they've gotten used to the other classes that we have available in the game, and monsters can add that touch of the unknown isn't exactly the word I'm looking for, but that touch of oddity to a battle game to make it really interesting and dynamic. But again, I think it really boils down to just communication between the game designer and the players, making sure that they fully understand what the monster is capable of, and from that point, it's just little tweaks for your player base.
I will give you a piece of advice on adding monsters to your game. If you're using monsters out of the door, the majority of them have the door and Avathar. They generally have a challenge rating on them. Take that as advice. It's not hard and fast rules.
Yep. Gotcha.
Yeah, the concept of the door challenge rating is that's how many people that it would take to fight them solo. But that's really, really dicey when it actually comes into practice because a lot of that depends on the skill level of your individual player, their grasp of the rules, and just things like that. Player skill comes highly into effect. I've seen some players run some really low power rating monsters and just devastate a field because they were really good and knew how to utilize the monster abilities to the best that they could. And then I've seen other games where people are running a scenario level monster and they just get mobbed by 5 or 6 people and they can't deal with it. So scenario monster with a 12 power rating getting mobbed by 6 people. Like the power ratings are not really a consistent way of balancing games. It all really comes down to who's playing it and how they play it.
I would also give you a piece of advice that if you're creating your own monsters for scenarios, I highly suggest giving your monsters an Achilles heel of some sort. Maybe not revealing it, but giving an Achilles heel of some sort. Like one of the most recent monster hunts that we ran actually didn't end up in combat. It was more quest style, but we hid an object on one of our players, and it was that object is what the monster was looking for. As soon as the object was revealed and given to the monster didn't care about fighting anymore.
All right, well, that's about all that I had prepared for this session. It's getting close to 8 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap the class up. I am going to say next month we will be doing Module 2. I believe that's on the 5th of next month. It's the first Wednesday, and we will be bringing in Sypha from Polaris. She is going to be guest speaking at our next class. So if you know Sypha, you know that she's ran some really good games for our kingdom in the past, and I'm really excited to hear her take on some of this stuff. In the meantime, if you guys have questions that you think about after the fact, or just discussion points that you want brought up at some point in the future, please send me a message and get me those questions and those. March 1st is the first Wednesday, so I might have those dates a little off. I'll have to get back. I'll make a post on the Kingdom page with the official date. But yeah, approximately a month away, we'll have Module 2. So yeah, if you have any further questions, please get them to me, and I will do my best to answer them. If not immediately, I'll answer them in a module down the road. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a great night.